Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Conversations with Francesca. It's your girl, Francesca, again. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the effects of bad parenting on a child. In our previous episode, the last episode, we're still talking about the parenting series, of course. In the last episode, we talked about what bad parenting is, the hallmarks of bad parenting, what you would see in a parent, and you would know that this one is not actually parenting their child or children appropriately. Today we're going to be focusing on the effects of this bad parenting on a child. What does it do to the child? What does it do to the psyche of the child? Today's episode, I'm going to be looking at various aspects. I will look at the emotional aspect of it. I will look at the behavioral aspect of it, especially on how it impacts the child. So today, let's focus first, let's look at the emotional aspect of bad parenting on a child. Let's look at it. One of the things that first affects a child that has been parented poorly or badly is their self-esteem. You discover that a child that has been subjected to bad parenting has very low self-esteem, either because they've been abused, pushed all over the place, such that they don't trust their ability to do something. So something that a child would ordinarily be able to execute, these children, products from bad parenting, begin to second guess themselves every step of the way. They can't do it. Not that they can't, not that they lack the ability to, but they just feel that they do not have enough to be able to do this thing that is being asked of them. And that's because they've been so shamed frequently. They've been told about their inability that they begin to believe it. It begins to become their reality. It becomes what they are living because they've seen themselves as somebody that cannot. Imagine being raised and being told perpetually that you cannot amount to anything or you cannot be worth anything. You grow up believing that lie that actually I can't. Actually, I can't do this. Actually, this is not what I can execute. Not because you lack the ability to, but because it's been drummed so much into your ears that you feel that you cannot do that. Another thing is anxiety. You find out that children that have suffered significantly from bad parenting have anxiety in them consistently. They exemplify it in their everyday life. They are anxious about everything. Everything at all gives them anxiety. Everything. It doesn't matter what you tell them. It doesn't matter what you do to them. They're anxious. They have sweaty palms over anything. They are fidgety because they've been around or they've been in a home where either you cannot make your opinions do not count, you cannot talk, so they've lived their life in such a way that they are constantly walking on eggshells. They're not free. They cannot talk. Their opinions do not matter. Nothing at all matters when it's coming from them. Now they grow up being consistently anxious. So you want to raise children that are confident in themselves, children that are not suffering from any kind of anxiety. They're not worried. They're not thinking to themselves, can I do this? Is this what I can do? Is this something that I cannot do? Another hallmark of bad parenting, and that's something that people talk about a lot, mental health issues. You discover that children that have suffered from bad parenting are perpetually or consistently, you know having some sort of depressive disorder. They are depressed. Anything gives them depression. Anything anything triggers them. Anything at all. You see them, these children, you know that these ones must have suffered significant trauma from their upbringing. They've been raised so poorly that anything at all triggers them. Talk about PTSD. talk about mental disorders. Recently I was reading an article and they said that um, even though bipolar is largely genetic, but some severity really, sometimes the bipolar gets severe by the kind of exposure the child or the adult, as it were, has been exposed to. So imagine a child being raised in an environment where bad parenting are the hallmarks of the day. They are being abused, they are being subjected to all sorts and forms of trauma, and they have a genetic disorder known as bipolar. Imagine what it will be like going forward. you know the symptoms increases, it worsens, because of what they've been exposed to, because of what they've had to endure. So we want to make sure that we are raising children that are not persistently looking over their shoulders before they can do anything. You want to raise confident children that will in turn become confident adults. One of the lasting impacts, that affects children that has been raised in a very bad environment, bad parenting, is the fact that they become extremely timid. They can't talk because they've been so trained that you do not have a voice. You're not allowed to speak. I remember sharing a story with a friend, and we're talking about some of the parenting styles that we were raised in, back back home in Africa, where you really cannot talk. It's a cultural thing. So your parents can be talking to you and you respond or you talk back at them, even when they are obviously wrong. You can't talk back. And I was just looking at it, considering it with the way my kids are currently being raised. And I know my son will say, "Oh, mom, that's a lie." And I'm like, "You don't tell your mommy that your mommy is lying." And you were like, but that's a lie though, mommy. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not exactly true, but it's actually wrong for you to tell an adult that they are telling lies. Anyway, that's just an aside. But it's a function of how we were raised. You can't call someone out that this person is being dishonest or something. You're required actually to keep quiet, stay silent, and say nothing you know and depending on the makeup of some children, once they do that, it begins to affect them, because now they no longer know, is this right, is this wrong, because they've been so trained not to speak against wrong, even when they can see it you know we also see mental disorders, all sorts of mental disorders plaguing these children that has been subjected to bad parenting. You want to make sure that your child doesn't fall into that bracket. You want to make sure that your child is not one of those that is enduring any of those. Another thing that happens with largely children that has been exposed to bad parenting is substance abuse. Okay, children that has been abused, we abuse substance. Just know that a child that has been abused will abuse substance, because then they are looking for a coping mechanism. They are looking for something to help them max their pain. They are looking for something to make them feel good. They are looking for something to take them out of the space where they've been plunged into by virtue of bad parenting. So they resort to all sorts of substance, drugs, whatever it is. They start to do hard drugs, because what I hear is that when you do hard drugs, or when you abuse substance, it transports you to some kind of fantasy land, and then you do not feel what you're supposed to be feeling. So it is important. It's actually very crucial that we raise children that do not become substance dependent. You don't want to raise a child that at the end of the day, they run their lives being solely dependent on substance. You want to raise children that are not doing that. You want to raise children that can function without resorting to substance. That's what you want to do. You want to make sure that your child is not going to resort to substance at any time just because of the kind of parenting that they've been exposed to. Another thing is the increased tendency, that these children have to end up on the street. You discover that children that has been raised poorly ends up on the street. In this part of the world, they probably become homeless. They end up on the streets, they are homeless because obviously they haven't been trained appropriately. So what else? What kind of life would they be exposed to? They get exposed to the kind of life that they've been offered, right? So if they've been raised badly, they don't know any other thing. They don't know a better life. They end up on the streets. In fact, I tell people that children that were raised poorly, of course, we've had people that has come out to, share their experiences on how they were raised and they turn out good. It's a function of grace. It's a function of the hard work that that child has had to put back into their lives. So when you see children that are dysfunctional, it's either because they're from a dysfunctional families, they've been exposed to things that children shouldn't be exposed to. So you want to make sure that you are the parent, be the parent, raise that child right, so that the hallmark of your child's life doesn't turn to all sorts, mental disorder, abuse of all sorts, any kind of thing, PTSD as it were. You want to make sure that you're not raising a child that is perpetually anxious. You don't want to raise a child that is aggressive. And when you see children that are being aggressive, aside from children that probably have some diagnosis or the other, a large chunk of them are reacting to the kind of upbringing that they've had. So they are being reactive. What has happened to them is what they are responding to. So you see them responding in anger, and you're wondering, what is going on here? What have we said? And why are you reacting like this? It's not you, it's the exposure that that child has had. I talked about the fact that they end up on the streets. I also another thing that I learned recently is, and I've seen it happen, dysfunctional families create a circle. So there's a circle of bad parenting. You've been raised badly. The likelihood that you will repeat the same circle is very high. You will repeat the same thing over again, because this is what this is what you've been exposed to. You find yourself doing exactly the same thing. So you want to guard against that. You want to raise children that are not repeating a dysfunctional circle. And I keep saying it, the fact that you've been raised poorly doesn't mean that you should raise your children poorly. However, to break that circle takes a lot of intentionality. You have to be intentional about your parenting style. You have to be intentional about what you expose yourself to. You have to be intentional about what you expose your child to. And if you know that the environment where you would be raising this child will not help that child, break free from that environment. It's okay to cut ties with people that you think will impact your child negatively. At the end of the day, like the parable of the talents that I like to always refer to, you know, these children are like talents in our hands. God is going to ask you, Francesca, how did you raise that which I committed into your hands? Did you raise them right? Did you raise them appropriately? So when God queries you on that, what will be your response? Would you say that I raised them the way I was raised? Or I raised them the way I saw some people raise theirs? It's going to be your turn to give account, and God help you that you are able to give proper account of the talents that has been committed into your hands. Okay, that's why we'll draw the curtain today on the effects of bad parenting on a child, on our children. Um, I hope you found this episode relatable. I hope this episode has also made you think carefully about what you're exposing your child to and how you're raising this child. Okay? Until I'm here again, it's still me, Francesca, on Conversations with Francesca. If you haven't followed us on Instagram, please do so. Do so now. It's free. Subscription is free. Okay? Follow us on TikTok, subscribe on YouTube, make sure your notification bell is on so you know when a new episode drops. We're on Apple Podcast, we are on Spotify. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I hope that you share, what you've seen, in terms of bad parenting and its effects on a child. Stay safe, stay blessed. See you next time. Bye.